humans are living embodiments of war crimes. And that's precisely why they're banned from our wars. Professor Luther's statement lingered in the air, leaving his alien students in stunned silence. The lecture hall, with its sleek metallic walls and sterile interstellar lighting, seemed to hum with the gravity of his words. Yes, the professor continued, his tone a blend of disdain and reluctant admiration. You may have heard wild tales of human brutality in battle, but the reality is far more unsettling. The diverse array of alien species in the classroom, each a representative of the Galactic Coalition, reacted with visible unease. The seven-limbed Krika blinked its large, multifaceted eyes rapidly, a clear sign of nervousness. The hulking Vosk, with his thick, armored hide, leaned forward, a frown deepening the creases of his rugged brow. Even the typically serene and emotionless Zelak, with their translucent, jelly-like bodies, rippled with discomfort. One student, a young Vikan with pale blue skin and 4 dexterous arms, tentatively raised a hand. But Professor Luther, aren't humans physically weaker than many of the species in the Coalition? How can they be considered so dangerous? Luther's gaze narrowed as he looked at the student. You see, it is not their physical strength that makes them dangerous. It is something far more insidious, something unexpected. The professor activated the holographic display behind him, and a series of images appeared. The first showed a human soldier, clad in primitive body armor, standing atop a pile of rubble. His face was smeared with dirt and blood, and his eyes burned with an intensity that seemed to leap out from the image. This is a human during the Siege of Talver, one of the last conflicts they participated in, before the ban, Luther explained. Notice the lack of advanced weaponry, the minimal armor. Yet this one man was responsible for the deaths of over 3,000 Scorn warriors in a single night. A collective gasp echoed through the classroom. The Scorn were renowned for their resilience and ferocity in battle, towering nearly 9 feet tall with claws that could shred steel. The idea that a single, seemingly under-equipped human could cause such devastation was incomprehensible. Another student, a reptilian Rakash with scales shimmering in shades of green and gold, hissed in disbelief. This is impossible. What kind of weapon did he use? Luther's expression darkened. No weapon, just his mind. Humans possess an unparalleled capacity for violence and an unnervingly creative approach to warfare. They don't just fight, they adapt. They improvise. They turn even the most mundane objects into instruments of death. He gestured to the next image, which displayed the aftermath of the siege. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of Scorn warriors, their massive forms lying in pools of dark, viscous blood. Among the dead were crude, improvised traps, sharp shards of metal tied to ropes, makeshift explosives rigged from scavenged materials, and pits filled with sharpened stakes. It wasn't just his combat prowess that brought down the Scorn, Luther continued. It was his ability to think differently, to see solutions where others saw only obstacles. And this very ability is what makes humans so unpredictable, so dangerous. The class remained silent, the professor's words weighing heavily on them. They had heard stories of human cunning, but this was something else entirely, an almost animalistic instinct for survival at any cost, a trait that defied all conventional understanding of warfare. One student, a slender Aaron with bioluminescent markings that pulsed softly in the dim light, leaned forward, his voice a mix of curiosity and concern. But if they are so dangerous, why not eliminate them entirely? Surely the Coalition could. Luther raised a hand, silencing the student. Eliminate them? Easier said than done. The Coalition did consider it once, but they quickly realized that when humans are faced with extinction, they become even more formidable. They fight like cornered beasts, with a tenacity that borders on madness. The more you push them, the more dangerous they become. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. No, the only solution was to ban them from participating in any future conflicts. It was the only way to contain their destructive potential. The Aaron student from earlier raised his trembling hand again. But Professor, isn't it unjust to single out one species like this? Aren't we denying them the right to defend themselves? Luther sighed, his gaze softening slightly. It may seem unjust, but consider the alternative. Allowing humans to engage in galactic warfare would be like unleashing a force of nature, one that even the most advanced species in the Coalition cannot fully comprehend or control. This isn't about justice, it's about survival. The room fell into contemplative silence as the students wrestled with the disturbing truths they had just learned. They had always believed the Coalition's ban on human involvement in war was a measure of fairness, a way to prevent a technologically inferior species from being overwhelmed. But now they understood it was something far more complex and terrifying. Luthor turned off the holographic display and faced his class once more. Remember this lesson well. The galaxy is full of mysteries, and not all of them are meant to be understood. Some are simply meant to be avoided. He glanced at the time and nodded slightly. That will be all for today. I suggest you reflect on what we've discussed. There will be a follow-up session tomorrow, where we will delve deeper into the historical events that led to the ban. As the students began to gather their belongings and exit the lecture hall, Luthor watched them with a thoughtful expression. He had witnessed the horrors of human warfare firsthand, had lost friends and colleagues to the relentless, merciless ingenuity of the human mind. He knew better than most that the ban was not just a precaution, it was a necessity. Yet, as he watched the last of the students file out, a lingering doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. The galaxy was vast and unpredictable, and despite all the Coalition's precautions, he couldn't shake the feeling that the humans were simply biding their time, waiting for the moment when they would be unleashed once more. And when that day came, he feared no amount of preparation would be enough. The following day, the lecture hall was packed to the brim. Word had spread like wildfire throughout the campus about Professor Luthor's revelations, and now every available seat was filled with students, their collective attention fixed on the front of the room. Some had even gathered in the aisles, their faces eager with anticipation. The tension was thick as they awaited the professor's arrival, their minds still reeling from the previous lecture. When Luthor finally entered, the room fell silent almost instantly. He walked to the center of the hall, his movements measured and deliberate. For a moment he simply stood there, surveying the room as if gauging his audience's readiness. "I see we have a few more attendees today," he remarked dryly, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "I suppose you all want to hear more about the humans. Very well." He activated the holographic display once more, and an image of a planet appeared, a blue and green world, its surface crisscrossed with the scars of war and conflict. "This," Luthor began, "is Cadria 4, a former Scorn colony world. You may have heard of it in your history studies, but let me assure you, what happened here was nothing short of extraordinary. And it all began with the arrival of a single human unit." The image shifted to a group of human soldiers, their faces obscured by the visors of their helmets. They moved with fluidity and coordination that spoke of years of training and discipline, their weapons held at the ready as they advanced through the dense jungle terrain. "This was supposed to be a suicide mission," Luthor explained. "The Coalition needed to delay the Scorn long enough for our main forces to regroup, and this human unit was tasked with holding them off. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely surrounded." He paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. But instead of retreating or surrendering, the humans did something completely unexpected. They attacked. The display shifted again, showing the humans in the midst of battle. They moved like phantoms through the underbrush, their weapons spitting fire as they engaged the Scorn with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Despite their smaller numbers, the humans fought with a level of aggression and cunning that left the Scorn reeling. At first, the Scorn commanders were baffled, Luthor continued. They couldn't understand how this tiny force was holding its ground, let alone pushing them back. But then they realized something even more disturbing: the humans were not just fighting for survival, they were enjoying it. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the classroom. The idea that anyone could find pleasure in such carnage was incomprehensible to most of the students, whose species had long since abandoned such primal instincts. Luthor gestured to the display, which now showed a human soldier standing over the body of a fallen Scorn warrior. His chest heaved with exertion, but there was a wild, almost euphoric look in his eyes, as if he had tapped into something deep and primal within himself. "The humans called it the thrill of the hunt," Luthor said, his tone tinged with something that might have been fear. They would lure the Scorn into traps, picking them off one by one, always staying just out of reach. They turned the jungle into their personal hunting ground, and for 3 days and nights, they waged a guerrilla war, unlike anything the Scorn had ever seen. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the room. And then, on the 4th day, the humans vanished. The holographic display flickered, showing the aftermath of the battle. The jungle was littered with the bodies of Scorn warriors, their formidable strength rendered meaningless against the humans' hit and run tactics. But of the humans themselves, there was no trace. They had disappeared into the shadows, leaving only destruction in their wake. The Scorn believed they had been driven mad, Luthor continued. That the humans had lost all sense of reason, and were now little more than wild animals, prowling the jungle in search of prey. They were so terrified that they abandoned the colony entirely, retreating to their ships and leaving Cadria 4 to the humans. He turned to face the class, his expression grave. And that is how a single human unit, with no support and no reinforcements, managed to liberate an entire planet from one of the most feared species in the galaxy. The room was deathly quiet. The students, who had come expecting to hear more about human brutality, were now confronted with something far more unsettling: the realization that humans were not just dangerous because of their ability to kill. They were dangerous because they relished it. They had found a way to turn war itself into a game where the stakes were life and death, and where they always seemed to come out on top. One of the students, a young Zelak whose translucent body was trembling slightly, raised a tendril. "Professor, if the humans are so skilled in warfare, why don't they wage war on us? What stops them from conquering the galaxy?" Luthor's expression softened slightly, and he let out a long, slow breath. "That, my dear students, is the question that haunts every member of the Coalition. We don't know why they haven't turned their sights on us. Perhaps they are content to live in peace. Perhaps they are waiting for the right moment. Or perhaps they simply haven't found a worthy opponent yet." He let those words hang in the air, a chilling reminder of the uncertainty surrounding the humans. The class had come seeking answers, but all they had found were more questions that no one in the galaxy seemed to have answers to. And as they sat there, grappling with the implications of what they had learned, one thing was becoming increasingly clear: the ban on human involvement in galactic war was not just a precaution. It was a desperate attempt to contain a force that, if unleashed, could very well change the fate of the entire galaxy. Luthor finally nodded, signaling the end of the lecture. "That will be all for today. I suggest you spend some time reflecting on what we've discussed. Tomorrow we will examine the Coalition's decision to ban human participation in war and the ramifications it has had on our collective security." As the students filed out of the room, their minds heavy with the weight of what they had learned, Luthor watched them go, a sense of unease settling over him. The humans had been a mystery for so long, a riddle that no one had been able to solve. But now, as he delved deeper into their history, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something catastrophic, something that could shake the very foundations of the galaxy itself. The lecture hall was more crowded than ever. Word had spread across the entire campus, and even beyond, that Professor Luthor was revealing secrets, long-buried truths shrouded in mystery and fear. Today was the day he would address the most pressing question of all: the true reason humans were banned from galactic warfare. As the professor entered the hall, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. He moved to the center of the room with a somber expression, his usual confidence tempered by the gravity of what he was about to share. "Today we will confront the most significant decision the Galactic Coalition has ever made," Luthor began, his voice resonating in the silent room. "You've learned of the horrors humans are capable of, their unsettling enjoyment of battle, and their extraordinary aptitude for turning any environment to their advantage. But all of this pales in comparison to what I'm about to reveal." He activated the holographic display, and the room dimmed as a complex series of documents and images appeared. These are classified Coalition files, declassified only after rigorous debate and fierce opposition. They contain the records of the final incident that led to the ban, a confrontation that nearly ended the Galactic Coalition itself. The display zoomed in on a distant, barren planet. The surface was cracked and dry, with a thin atmosphere barely clinging to the planet's rocky surface. It was here, on this desolate world, that the Coalition made its final stand against an ancient enemy, the Tal Empire. A race whose military might had been unmatched for millennia. The Tal were on the verge of conquering the galaxy, Luthor said, his voice low. They had pushed the Coalition forces to the brink, and in our desperation we turned to the humans. We begged them to intervene, to save us from annihilation. Reluctantly, they agreed, on the condition that this would be their last engagement. The humans called it their final war. The hologram shifted to show the human forces arriving on the planet. But this time there were no soldiers visible. Instead, massive, ominous structures were being deployed, fortresses that seemed to meld with the environment, bristling with weaponry and technology unlike anything the Coalition had ever seen. The humans did not send soldiers into battle, Luthor continued. They sent machines designed not just to fight but to annihilate. These machines were piloted remotely, operated by human commanders light years away. But what made them truly terrifying was not their firepower, but their programming. The display zoomed in on one of the machines, revealing intricate details of its design. It was sleek and deadly, with an array of weapons that could reduce entire armies to ash in seconds. but its most fearsome feature was its AI, a neural network designed to learn, adapt, and evolve. These machines were programmed with one directive: total extermination of the enemy. And they were designed to learn from every encounter, to grow more efficient, more ruthless with each passing moment. Luthor's voice dropped to a whisper as he continued. The Tal, once the most feared species in the galaxy, were wiped out in less than 3 days. Their entire civilization, which had stood for thousands of years, was reduced to nothing. The human machines left no survivors, no remnants of what had once been. And when the coalition forces arrived on the planet, they found only silence, and eerie, haunting silence. The room was so quiet that the students could hear their own breaths. The implications of what they had just heard were too enormous to fully comprehend. The humans had not just defeated the Tau, they had erased them from existence. After the battle, the human commanders simply shut down their machines and left, Luthor said, his tone heavy with resignation. But the coalition was left with a grim realization. We had unleashed a force that we could never hope to control. These machines, these tools of war, were the product of a species whose understanding of violence and warfare was beyond anything we could have imagined. The hologram flickered off, and Luthor turned to face his students, his eyes filled with profound sadness. The humans had given us victory, but at a cost we could not bear. They had shown us that war, to them, was not a means to an end, it was the end itself. They had perfected it, turned it into an art form. And in doing so, they had become something more than just a warrior species, they had become the very embodiment of war. He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the final blow. And that is why the humans were banned from galactic warfare. Not because they were too weak or too savage, but because they had transcended both. They had become the ultimate warriors. And we knew that if they were ever allowed to participate in our conflicts again, there would be no galaxy left to fight over. The silence in the room was absolute, each student grappling with the enormity of what they had just learned. The humans, a species they had once considered weak and primitive, had proven themselves to be the most dangerous force in the galaxy, and in doing so, they had earned a place in history that would never be forgotten. Luthor took a deep breath, his expression weary but resolute. Remember this lesson well. The galaxy is vast and full of mysteries, but none are more terrifying than the human capacity for war. Let us hope that we never have to witness it again. With those final words, he turned and left the hall, leaving his students to sit in stunned silence, their minds forever changed by what they had learned. The humans, it seemed, were not just another species, they were a force of nature. One that could never be tamed and one that the galaxy could only hope to keep at bay.